the Oklahoman newsroom. This is an OU update, our extended look at Oklahoma basketball. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell and OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, it comes down to one final regular season game for the Sooners, or does it? Ryan, right now 7-10 are the Sooners in Big 12 play. Obviously on a really tough stretch right now. Broke the losing streak 2 games ago, but then went to Baylor and lost badly. What's the must-win level, 1 to 10, on this game for the Sooners?
Well, I wouldn't quite put it 10, but it's really high. It's about 9.8 on the Sooners' radar for a lot of reasons. When you talk about NCAA tournament hopes, I think certainly if they win this one, they're in the field, and I talk about the field, they're able to avoid Dayton. If you lose it, not only does Dayton get put into play, but missing the tournament completely gets thrown into play. And I think they won, one game in February. Mm-hmm. There's only been one other team in the 64-team era that has made the tournament with just one win in February. UConn a few years ago did it. So it's high for the tournament seeding in both NCAA and Big 12, and just the way that they feel about themselves entering postseason play.
Well, when you look at the strength of schedule in the non-conference and the way the Sooners played there, how many wins they got, plus the strength of the Big 12, there's going to be a lot of good argument about the Sooners, Barry. But if this team that's now 7-10 loses to Iowa State, last place team in the league, and finishes 7-11, 4 games under 500 in the Big 12, it's not unprecedented that a team 4 games under 500 would get in the NCAA tournament, but that bar is pretty high.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 20 years. The committee put in Iowa State in '92 at 5-9 in the Big 8. In '98, they put in Florida State at 6-10 in the ACC. I think the Sooners are going to get in. They got so many quality wins. The committee loves quality wins. But the point is, if you're not going to beat Iowa State at home, you know, what's the point? I mean, you're going to go to somewhere and get your brains beat out if you can't play any better than this. The Kansas State game last Saturday, a nice win. Sooners played well. You think, hey, maybe they've snapped out of it. But they go to Baylor, maybe play the worst game they've played all season. So something has afflicted this squad. Nobody knows what it is, but they're just not playing the way they did. And all the hopes, I mean, think about 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, all the hopes of, hey, maybe playing Dallas, playing Wichita. Mm-hmm. There for a while we were talking #1 seed. Now a number 11 seed looks pretty good. Mm-hmm. So, you know, this season is just sort of slowly crashing to a bitter end.
Yeah, and Ryan, you were there in Waco for well, I don't know what you want to term it, but it was ugly. You know, Sooners come out, score on the first 2 shots they take, then over the next 19 minutes only score 11 points. I mean, remember when this was a really fun offensive team that scored 90, almost 100 points every game? Tell us what happened, and is that game, as bad as it was, were there fingerprints from some of these other losses that you saw come back in that loss at Waco?
Well, I think the big thing that happened is they started missing shots, and when they started missing shots, everything else just crumbled apart on them. Mm-hmm. They stopped rebounding. The defensive effort went away, which we saw. Their defensive effort against Kansas State, I thought, was fantastic for one of the few times this year, honestly. But that completely went away. Their will to hit the boards was just atrocious, would be the closest thing I could say to it. And then the shots never fell. Trae Young, I think, started forcing those long 3-pointers pretty early, and he got frustrated, I think, because he was throwing some passes early in the game, and those other guys weren't finishing, whether it be the long passes into the corner threes that he did a couple times, the whipping it down low just didn't work, and then he started chasing points, and when he started doing that, he started missing, and that margin just grew and grew and grew till they were down 22 with a couple minutes left to go in the first half.
We'll talk more about the defense and the rebounding in a second, but Barry, Ryan mentions Trae Young, and early on I thought his court vision, his passing, I mean, he had some guys for some looks that, I mean, wide open stuff, whether it was, as Ryan said, threes, jump shots, in the paint, a variety of things. Did you sense the snowball, and how do they avoid that? If you're in Trae Young's shoes and you see your teammates getting these great looks that they're not hitting, it's got to be a little bit difficult to say to yourself, okay, I'm not going to shoot. I'm just going to keep feeding my teammates here.
Yeah, and I think we saw that with some of the shots that Trae Young took as the game went on. He took more and more ill-advised three-pointers, but as you said, he'd made a lot of passes that became fruitless. So it's just a frustrating situation. This team has to score to win. They're not going to win many games 64-60. They're going to have to win games 84-80. And they're not good enough defensively to really shut anybody down. They're going to have to score, and they haven't been scoring. They just, guys aren't making shots, and teams are bottling up Trae Young in fairly significant ways. So it's just it's just a far cry from what we saw, and it's got to be driving Lon Kruger mad. This is a guy that's been coaching for 40 years and has had great success, and we know he knows what he's doing, and yet he can't unlock it. So it may just be unlockable. This may be just a thing where this team is just not what we thought it was, and this team is not capable of breaking out of this slump.
Ryan, we're talking about those early moments of that Baylor game where it seemed to really unravel. I didn't sense outwardly that Trae Young was frustrated. I mean, I would have been, because he was getting guys shots in great positions, wasn't really forcing it himself early, looked to be getting those guys involved. Did you sense that? I mean, obviously the outward sign of him maybe shooting some shots that were ill-advised, but where do you sense he is on the frustration scale right now?
Well, his body language was actually relatively positive throughout that game, and I sort of kept an eye on that as those shots kept not falling, those opportunities kept not being converted. His body language seemed to be decent. Now, what he did certainly showed that he was aware of what was going on, that he sort of needed to force the issue a little bit. But I'm interested to see how this team comes out on Friday night, because after the game I talked to Christian James, talked to Trae Young. Embarrassment was the theme, and just sort of resolved that we're going to be better on Friday. But we've heard that a lot over the month of February, and with a few exceptions, down in Texas Tech when I thought they played pretty well defensively, especially before they lose that game, and with that Kansas State game that they won. Really, outside of that, you haven't seen that be there for them since the streak started.
Barry, if you're coaching Trae Young, if you're mentoring Trae Young, what do you say to him? I mean, as he goes, this team goes, but pretty clearly the guys around him, it's becoming more and more difficult to have that support. What do you tell him? What do you try to maybe have him do that could maybe help a little bit in this situation?
Well, one thing I would tell him is don't let the disappointment and the frustration bubble up. The truth is, Trae Young's going to have a bright future no matter what happens to this Oklahoma basketball team. The one thing to me that could sort of mar this season is if things disintegrate in any kind of chemistry ways.
Yeah.
If Oklahoma goes out there and misses, goes 4 of 26 from three-point range and gets beat in the first round of the NCAA tournament, you just say, well, we tried. But if things sort of bubble up and there's some sort of frustration evident, that would be unfortunate. Nobody wants that. So I'd try to I would encourage Trae and the rest of the guys too, keep the attitude positive, keep things going. And that's where Lon Kruger comes in and will do a great job with that, because Lon is that way. Lon looks the same after getting beat 23 in Waco as he did when he beat Oregon to go to the Final Four. He acts the same, looks the same. So they got a good role model in Lon Kruger.
Well, and Ryan, Lon Kruger has tried to help maybe infuse this team as they've struggled to change the lineup 3 games ago, a lineup that's now 1-2. Mixed results, obviously, a game at Kansas, a game at Baylor, not exactly the easiest spots, but what's your sense about what Lon Kruger is making of all of this?
Well, just I think he's frustrated. He like Barry mentioned, he's sort of the same outwardly, regardless of what's going on. But I also wonder if this team sort of needs a kick.
Yeah.
And the problem is they've got one senior on this team, Kadeem Lattin, who's not that fiery guy. He vocal, he talks, but not the just emotional type of guy that a lot of teams need when things sort of go downhill. Yeah. Trae Young's a freshman. I don't know that he knows exactly how to handle that. Really, Christian James is the one that you figure might be able to be that guy internally that gets up and sort of lights a fire under anybody. But I think going back to what you asked, Lon Kruger is frustrated, but he's also trying to not be emotional and make changes just sort of irrationally. He waited a long time to make a lineup shift, and I don't think he would like to go back if he could help it, but certainly the results through 3 games, not great. Although Tuesday, I didn't think the starting lineup was necessarily a problem. Yeah. I mean, you get Jamuni McNeese involved early, you're moving the ball on the first couple possessions, and then it falls apart, and things certainly went south when bench players started coming in. But we'll see if he makes another change on Friday.
Yeah. I was thinking about Lon Kruger going into post-game and, being asked about what's going on with his team. He's often a guy that talks about, we've just got to get better. We've just got to, improve. We've just got to work every day. I'm sure he's still saying that, Barry. I mean, I know that those are words that are probably still coming out of his mouth, but there has to be a level of consternation. I mean, this is a group that he's around every day. They were obviously very successful early. I'm sure that they're still getting in the gym, working hard, but that improvement has just not been there.
No, and some of this falls on Kruger because much of it's strategic. I mean, especially the OU offense, it's not being played the way it was in December and maybe early January. Teams are loading up on Trae Young, getting the double teams and the traps and the hedges and all those things much earlier, much higher up the court. And the adjustments by the Sooners have not worked. You got to wonder if Kruger's out of ideas. He's tried a million things, I'm sure, but at some point there's not much more you can do. So the good news for Oklahoma is this. When you have a team like this that has always lived and died by the deep ball and the three-point shot, that at some point you could start making some. I mean, this is a team that if somebody just throws in some three-pointers, all of a sudden they could win 2 games in Kansas City, and all of a sudden you think, wow, look, everything's great. So they have a puncher's chance against anybody because of that shooting ability, but they also have the chance to get blown out because of their defensive shortcomings and if the ball bounces off the rim.
Lastly, before we talk about Kansas City, Ryan, you mentioned this earlier, the defense, the rebounding, how poor it was once the shots stopped falling in Waco. Did anybody foresee this team being quite as porous as they've been defensively and just not able to really mount much of a charge at all when it comes to the defensive side?
Well, I didn't expect them to be great defensively. I didn't expect them to be this bad. I mean, generally Lon Kruger's teams play you tough defensively. They get after it on the boards, and this team just hasn't done that at all. Really up and down the lineup outside of when Rashard Odoms has been healthy. He hasn't been 100% healthy in a while, but it's just one of those head-scratching things about this season in a year full of head-scratching things, that the way that they play defense, and especially just how quickly it goes by the boards. Yeah. I mean, we saw things just disintegrate at a rapid-fire pace in Waco, and they never were able to recover, really.
And it seemed like in a lot of instances there were, I mean, yes, the defense was not great, but then there were issues of effort, guys not chasing down 50-50 balls, going after things they should have gone after too, Ryan.
Well, yeah, there's a spot, and I mentioned this in my game story, there's a spot about, I think it was about 1:45 left in the first half. Baylor misses a dunk, bad, the ball bounces out in their midcourt. It looks like it's just going to roll out of bounds, and Cameron McGusty is just sort of jogging after it instead of getting out running and trying to get out in transition, get you a quick bucket. He jogs after it. Well, a Baylor defender or a Baylor player is just going all out after it, dives, is able to save the ball, and 20 seconds later, Baylor's up by 22. And, not that it wasn't a blowout by that point, but that was just sort of indicative of the kind of effort that we saw on Tuesday in Waco.
All right, let's talk about Big 12 tournament, because obviously this becomes much more important for this team in terms of, resume for NCAA selection and confidence too, Barry. it's not out of the question that they could be playing in one of those pigtail games on Wednesday as a one of the low seeds in this tournament. Can they avoid it? What if they don't avoid it?
Well, I mean, you could look at it two ways. It's actually more likely than not that they will be playing a preliminary game. The Sooners can get up to the 6th seed and get a bye if Kansas beats OSU, if Kansas State beats Baylor, if West Virginia beats Texas, and the Sooners beat Iowa State. Probably all 4 teams that I mentioned need to win are favored in those games, but for all 4 to win, it seems unlikely. I don't know. Would you rather be the 8th seed playing Texas in a preliminary game, or the 6th seed playing the next night against Texas Tech? I don't know I don't know if this team needs to play or needs not to play. Whatever they need is whatever you think they need is how you ought to cheer for. But
I think it depends on what happens in the game, whether they would like. I mean, if because what they do doesn't matter, well, it matters, but they need to win to get up into that 6th spot, obviously. But the other games are what's more important for them as far as where they fall. If you win against Iowa State and then you play one of the lower teams in the league, if you win it on Wednesday, then no matter what happens moving forward, maybe you feel a little bit better about yourself and solidify your tournament resume.
You would have won 3 out of 5 in that case.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But obviously, if you're in that 8-9 spot, Kansas looms as a possibility fairly
let's not
quickly.
even talk about that. Let's not even talk about that.
Yeah. Now that said, if you're OU, when you talk about the top teams in this league, I think Tech may be the one that you would like to play, just because of
you've matched up well with them.
They match up pretty well with them, and Tech is really struggling with injuries right now with Keenan Evans. I think Zach Smith has also been hurt, so that may be. And they've actually played pretty good defense against Texas Tech. Not that Texas Tech's offense is phenomenal, certainly without Keenan Evans in there.
Obviously, a lot left up in the air with this team, guys. Last question. If you could say, how many games do you think OU will win in Kansas City next week?
I'm going to say 0. I mean, I don't know how you could pick them to win. I mean, if they play Texas on a neutral court, I don't know how you can pick them to win. Those Longhorns swept them. And
let me know if Mo Bamba plays.
No, that would help. Yeah, or Eric Davis.
Or Eric Davis, yeah.
Longhorns are short-handed too. Maybe you want to play Texas.
Right.
So,
if you're betting on an over/under right now, it's got to be 0. Or point whatever.
Take the under. Take the under.
Right. All right. Well, guys, we'll see how Friday. It's a Friday night game. Last regular season game, Iowa State at the Lloyd Noble Center, so mark those calendars for Friday. And then next week on Wednesday, Big 12 tournament starts in Kansas City. We'll have all your coverage, so be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.